Good afternoon. I'm Katie Jeffries. We are now 3 days into the Aiden McClendon murder trial. He was just 22 months old when he was shot and killed while riding in a car back in 2016. And today, more gang members are taking the stand describing a certain music video. First Coast News, Cam Eppinger. He has been covering this trial all morning. He brings us an update now. Cam, what's the latest?
Katie, good afternoon. Today, the state prosecutors, they continued their case and trying to prove that the two defendants involved in this case are in fact criminal gang members. That was the focus here today at the Duval County Courthouse. Now, while in court, the state called a man who said he was a member of the same gang as the two defendants, Henry Lee Hayes and Kwame Richardson. Now, the state asked us to conceal that person's identity for safety reasons. Now, while on the stand, he identified dozens of pictures from social media that included gang members holding up gang signs with their hands. The witness confirmed that the two defendants were in most of those pictures holding up signs. Now, the state also showed a rap music video that was produced by the defendants' gang, and the video is laced with guns, gang members, and foul language. Again, this evidence is all being used to try and prove that the defendants were in fact gang members, which is an essential part of the charges against them. Now, testimony is expected to continue throughout the day, and the trial is expected to continue throughout next week. For now, reporting live from the Duval County Courthouse, I'm Cam Eppinger, First Coast News, on your side.